Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 180 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is person first or diagnosis first, the language better? A clinical psychology and autism podcast episode. And it is Wednesday the 23rd of November 2022 as I record this. So I'm actually recording this early for change because on Saturday, the day that I normally do the podcast recording, is actually my brother's wedding. That's that I really am looking forward to there. But it also means that yes, I can't record the podcast, but it also means on Sunday I'll be too busy with my university stuff to actually edit the podcast, so I'm trying to get it all done before Friday. But going back to the actual podcast episode, this is probably one of my most favourite episodes in quite a while because this is just such a fun, really quite thought-provoking podcast episode because personally, I never would have thought of this by myself, and when I first encountered this topic of the sort of language to use, quite surprisingly, because I'm normally quite hot on calling mental health conditions, conditions and not disorders, and that sort of helpful, more beneficial language. I actually thought this was a bit over the top when I first encountered it. But this podcast episode is just so good that I really enjoyed it. And I definitely think this will be quite eye-opening for all of us. Definitely hang on and definitely check it out. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And because I'm recording this on a Wednesday, this week's hasn't been sent out to me, so I'm actually reading from the one that came out in early October 2022. So the first one is, eco-labels on food encourages people to eat more sustainably. How can people be encouraged to eat less beef to benefit their environment? According to the results of a new study in behavioural public policy, a simple change to food labelling might help. When menu options were accompanied by eco-labels indicating how sustainable they were, participants were less likely to choose the low-scoring beaver product instead opting for vegetarian or chicken alternatives. So even though this is actually quite a short psychology news article, but of course this is a very important topic because as I talk about this, COP finished 1 or 2 weeks ago, which I focused on the climate change. This year we've had tons of wildfires, etc., and really bad, really, to be honest, quite catastrophic environmental disasters. So it's always important to look about how can we be more sustainable, not just as countries and governments, but also as individuals, because of course tons of people might think, oh, I can't make a change, I'm just one person, so I can't make an impact. But that's not the point. If we all do something small, then it's tons of people doing those small things, so that actually adds up to a really great whole. And over time, though, work like that does help to make a massive impact. So the fact that we're actually looking at a research and actually how can we make people be more sustainable, that is only a good thing. And then it's also quite nice to know that by simply adding eco food labels to food, something that to be honest is actually quite cheap and affordable, then this is a really easy way to hopefully make quite a big impact. So hopefully you would hope more companies would do that, but let's find out. So the last one is, oh yeah, and this one I actually quite liked when I looked at the article when I first got it. So, men ask more questions than women at psychology conferences. Asking a question at an academic conference really puts you in the spotlight. You're standing in front of a room full of colleagues, hoping that you are going to come across as articulate and insightful. And whether it's intentional or not, questioning a speaker in front of your peers sends a signal that you are an authority and represents the kind of person who belongs in the field. So it's a problem if some groups are made to feel less comfortable participating in these sessions. In a recent study in psychological science, Sinead Jarvis from the University of California, Berkeley, and colleagues find that women tend to feel more anxious about asking a question and are less likely than men to do so. The findings add to the body of research on how gender inequalities are perpetuated in science. So there are a few things I actually want to mention here. Of course, straight up, it is absolutely unacceptable that women are made to feel less comfortable and more anxious in any settings, and that is something that we do need to figure out how to change. I will also say that asking a question, talking from personal experience and the new cohort that I've joined, you've got to be careful how you ask it because there was one or two people in this new cohort that I've joined because I did my placement year. All the people that I started university with have graduated. So in this new cohort, there are two people who ask questions to the academic. Again, I've not got a problem with them asking questions. It's just how rudely they do it and how argumentative and how determined they are to make the lecturers seem like idiots. That is not acceptable in my idea. I just think that it's rude, and to be honest, it's not needed because some of the questions, if they simply let the lecturers talk, then the points they're trying to make will actually be disproven. And some of their points and some of the questions are just not that articulate and they're not that, what else did this article say? They're not very insightful, and to be honest, some of them just really silly points over it. So definitely ask questions. It's a great way to engage in learning, learning, and it really helps in engagement. Just do not be rude, please. I know if you're listening to this podcast, I really doubt you are, but I'm just trying to share a bit of my own personal experience here. So, I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So, let's move on to the personal update. So, we're moving on to the personal update. Besides from the fact that this is really early, in the week, and I haven't actually got anything to report besides from me really looking forward to my brother's wedding. I'm basically going to skip today's personal update simply because it's just too early in the week. So, as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So, you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at this channel at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And you can always leave a comment on the Facebook post at Connor Whiteley, psychology author. And today's episode has been sponsored by Developmental Psychology, a guide to developmental and child psychology. So the reason why this is actually a great book for today's episode is because autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, meaning that is from a birth, and it does affect how a child develops from their brain development to their cognitive development and so many other great areas. So what this really easy to understand book actually does is that it teaches you and it helps you to understand how is a child's theory of mind, cognitive development, brain development, play styles, and so many more wonderful topics develops in neurotypical children. And then towards the end of the book, it does actually touch on autism. And this book, it does go into a lot of really good depth. That's easy to understand, and it's actually engaging. You will not be bored reading this book. So that is Developmental Psychology, a guide to developmental and child psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can buy the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And you can buy the ebook directly from me at payhip.com/Con Whiteley. So that just means that as the creator, I get more of the money instead of these retailers. But if you do want to buy a book, be someone to give the podcast a bit of one-time support, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Con Whiteley. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So what we're going to be looking at is the person first or diagnosis first language better. Now, but this is actually quite a long podcast episode, but to be honest, I absolutely loved it. It's filled with so much great information, and I definitely feel like this is something that will become more and more relevant in the future, because I first encountered this topic back in July 2022, and I dismissed it because I think it was people being a bit too correct to some extent, which looking back I now think was really stupid of me. But now that I've started to encounter this a lot more in literature reviews, academic papers, and clinical psychology, yeah, because my lecturer this week I was actually talking about it quite a bit, I now realise this is really important. And after looking at this topic, I can honestly say I love it, and I think this is just such a brilliant episode. But let's dive into it. Introduction to person with autism or autistic person. As a result of me fully believing in honesty between me and you, as my wonderful podcast audience, I first encountered this when I was working with a PhD student on my gamification of autism literature review back in May. I just thought that he was being a bit like nitpicky because he wasn't sure on what term to use because this language is very new. But I am seeing this more and more, so that's why I want to focus on it. Therefore, I thought this was just been a little too correct because from my point of view, labels, diagnosis and more, all of them can be damaging and stigmatizing and harmful in their own right. And I have written about these in the past in different places. However, when I returned to university this September and we started having autism lectures, I realised the drive towards a correct language is a very real, good, and it needs to happen. But again, no one is taking the time to explain the language to me as a student. So I found some research and now I want to look at it to help explain it to all of us. Also, I should mention here that there is a fair amount of today's episode that is focused on the carer's experience of using a language. But at the end of the podcast episode, I do explain how this applies to us as future or current clinical psychologists. Person first and condition first language. I seriously doubt any of this will come as a surprise to anyone, but the vast majority of the people's understanding of autism comes from the biomedical model standpoint. This model sees autism as a disease and it normally uses person-first language. For example, person with autism. Kenny and all, 2016. In addition, I am very happy to know that despite the damage some labels can do to people with mental health conditions, there are a lot of parents of the young people on the autistic spectrum that find the diagnosis process reassuring, since it validates their concerns about their child's well-being, behaviour and future, as well as it offers a roadmap of support. But it gets rather interesting when we realise that other parents and the children find the process of integrating the concept of autism spectrum conditions into their narrative about their child's very identity to be very confronting. As a result, lots of carers and their parents go through a process of redefining their expectations towards their child, and some even grieve for the former expectations they have about parenting a neurotypical child. Personally, I want to jump in here and to mention that I do understand this wholeheartedly, because if you're a parent or you have nieces or nephews, then you would do plan for the future. I should have a niece coming next May, and of course me and my family are already planning for things for the future and far future. So if those ideas are effectively ripped away from us and made impossible, I say in air quotes, then this can be very upsetting. However, I also want to point out here that just because a child has autism, it doesn't mean that they can't do anything in life, since given the right support and scaffolding, autistic children can do a lot of things that neurotypicals can. Anyway, in case you didn't know, in the UK at least, autism diagnosis takes years. And I was actually quite shocked in my lecture when I found out that the average autism diagnosis takes 4 years. And I'm going to write in a book at some point about how, to be honest, quite silly that is and how damaging that is. Because if you've got a child, you don't want to wait 4 years to be able to get the help and support. You need support now. Surely that's why you're taking the child to get a diagnosis. But anyway, that's another problem with the NHS. It's a problem and that edges into politics. So that's just not good. So we're going back to the blog post. Therefore, by the time the carers and the parents receives a diagnosis, the vast majority of these are absolutely no stranger to being judged by others. Rohan 2013, and they experience increased levels of stress. Bonus 2016. This happens because their child's special needs and these tend to have a comorbidity with chronic conditions. For example, anxiety, attention challenges, sleeping difficulties, and disruptive disorders. Muller et al. 2022, and this all has financial implications too. Tadar and Jang 2021. Why do carers and the parents choose a language for preference? Moving on to the main topic of this episode, even before a parent or carer has received a autism diagnosis for their child, they might choose a language preference to help set a boundary surrounding the identity narrative that they want to create for their loved one. This serves a few purposes, including it's to help the gently assimilate the new reality of the diagnosis into the perception of their loved one. Moreover, the heterogeneous nature of autism adds to the carer's uncertainty about the impact of early autism interventions on their child's symptomology. As well as it's important to note here that every single child on the autistic spectrum is different, with the frequency and severity of their symptoms changing over time. This all makes it a lot more difficult for carers to experience acceptance. Why do people choose a person-first language initially? With the diagnosis mainly being from the biomedical model, it leaves the parent and the carers wanting to use the person-first language initially for a few reasons. For example, if the carer comes from a counselling or mental health vocation, then a person-first language could come from their own personal preference. Also, person-first language is effective for the limited awareness of the experience of autistic people from their own point of view, as well as lots of carers are uncertain about how the diagnosis will affect their child's sense of self and being in the world. Furthermore, once a carer has a diagnosis, they slowly and quickly start expanding their awareness of what autism means over the course of their years, because we need to appreciate as a current or future psychologists that this is a very scary time, because these carers do not know what autism is, what it means, and what help is available. That's why a part of our job in an ideal world, and if you know the NHS and if you know clinical psychology in the UK, we don't live in an ideal world, unfortunately. So that's why part of our job in an ideal world is to help guide them through the process. As a result, the carer's knowledge expands over the course of years, and they have a clear understanding of what being on the autistic spectrum actually means for their child, and this includes how the child sees themselves. For instance, lots of carers notice how they learn to appreciate the cherished aspects of their personality, and this includes the aspects that are intertwined with them on the spectrum. It also includes the acknowledgement of the challenges the person faces, but also the celebration of their growth and their achievements. Subsequently, as a carer's experience of acceptance deepens, sometimes the language preference shifts, so they prefer disability first terminology. Nonetheless, I know I am focusing a lot here on the carer's viewpoint, and normally I would flat out avoid this, because personally I am only really interested in what the person with the condition is experiencing. And yes, I know it's all part of a system, but I sort of see it as we focus on the person with the condition, and then we see what surrounds them, and it tends to be the family and the carers that are around them, and they can be influencing the psychological difficulties, but they're not really the focus necessarily. I hope that made sense, because I literally just did that bit off the top of my head. Anyway, so going back to the blog post, but in this case, there were lots of narratives and evidence of this coming from the carers of the children with autism. Consequently, I am absolutely not saying that children with a condition do not have the right to choose their own language and preference, or what they want to be called, because they seriously do have that right, and everyone else does too. I am simply writing about this from what the research and other articles I can find says. Why might diagnosis first language be better? It turns out that whilst diagnosis first language isn't too common in certain fields, like counselling, it has been suggested by Brown 2012 to be associated with greater acceptance of autistic people as neurodivergent, and this helps to go beyond the disorder model perspective on autism. Furthermore, Kenny and all 2016 found that despite some of their ability, a lot of parents and carers of autistic children generally prefer diagnosis first terminology, as it places an emphasis on the value neutral neurodiversity and the positive aspects of autism. Overall, modern research suggests that identifying as autistic does have a positive impact on the self-esteem of autistic people, and lowers the risk of them developing depression. Occasional 2017. What does this mean for clinical psychologists? As a current or future psychologist, I definitely feel that there are quite a few different takeaways for us to learn from. For example, I will always firmly believe that it is critical that we move away from the disorder perspective model of all conditions, because that isn't how mental health conditions work, and it's so biomedical focused that I seriously doubt has any place in the modern clinical psychology. Therefore, using diagnosis first language is important, not only for us as professionals, because it shows how serious we are about moving away from the biomedical model and towards something more empirical and something akin to the biopsychosocial model. However, it has also been important for us to start using diagnosis first language because it addresses something that is so wonderfully critical to our profession. That helps to decrease the oppression, psychological distress, and helps to improve self-esteem. Since being on the spectrum does not make a person messed up, strange, or weird, and if you're using diagnosis first language helps our clients and the people we are meant to help, then that is only a good thing. Personally, and the final thing for this section I will mention is that I was very surprised by this podcast episode because I fully believed coming into this topic that a person first language was the best because it should be harmful to define someone only by their condition. But it turns out that whilst that is true in other areas, when it comes to a person first or diagnosis first language, it is better to do diagnosis first. And that is what I love of this podcast, learning and psychology, because there is always something to see advise you. Conclusion. At the end of this great episode, I think the most important thing we need to remember here is that diagnosis first language isn't bad, and in fact it does have a lot of great benefits for a person's mental health and acceptance. So personally, I really hope that we continue to debate the impact of language, we keep researching it, and hopefully over time more and more people will start to adopt this more positive language. And in an ideal world, our society's definition of autism will change too to become more positive and accepting. Being autistic isn't a death sentence, a prison sentence, or anything. And just because you're autistic, it doesn't mean that you cannot do things to a large extent. It just means you think differently. You might need more support, but I always come back to one of the founding principles of the Mental Capacity Act. We should never ever assume someone cannot do something just because of their condition, and that seriously applies to autism. So even though this was definitely quite a long podcast episode, I still loved it. I think this is just such a brilliant topic, and I'm actually quite passionate about it. So I hope that came through, and I really hope that you enjoyed it too. And if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out Developmental Psychology, a guide to developmental and child psychology, available in all the usual places, including buying the ebook directly from me at payhip.com/Connor Whiteley. But if you didn't want to buy a book, you still wanted to support the podcast, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ConWhiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.